Tonight, we look at two nations, both global powers, both democracies, the United States and Japan. They are allies, partners in trade, share many common values. Yet when it comes to the ultimate punishment, the death penalty, their paths diverge dramatically. To understand the differences, we first need to look at the basic facts. In the United States, the death penalty is a patchwork system. Legal at the federal level, legal in 27 states, 23 states have abolished it. Where you commit a crime can determine whether you face execution. As of 2025, there are over 2,000 people on death row across the country. Methods of execution vary. Lethal injection is the most common. Electrocution, gas chamber, firing squad. The system is decentralized and reflects deep political divides within the nation. In stark contrast, Japan's system is centralized and uniform. The death penalty is legal nationwide and reserved for extremely violent crimes, most commonly multiple murders. The number of inmates on death row is significantly lower, typically around 100. There is only one method of execution: hanging. Hanging has been used for over a century and remains the sole procedure. There is no state-by-state variation. The process is the same, managed by the National Ministry of Justice. The pace of executions in the United States has been on a downward trend for 2 decades. Legal challenges, problems obtaining lethal injection drugs, shifting public opinion. In 2024, fewer than 20 executions took place. This slow pace means many inmates die of natural causes after spending decades on death row. Japan's pace is more sporadic but can be decisive. The number of executions per year varies, often depending on the sitting Minister of Justice. The legal road that leads to a death sentence begins very differently in each country. In the United States, the process is adversarial and public from the start. After an arrest for a capital crime, the accused is entitled to a lawyer. The case proceeds to a trial by jury. A jury of 12 citizens must first unanimously find the defendant guilty. Then, in a separate penalty phase, that same jury hears arguments for and against the death penalty. They weigh aggravating factors like the brutality of the crime against mitigating factors such as the defendant's background or mental health. The jury must again be unanimous in its decision to impose death. Japan's legal journey is markedly different. While Japan adopted a lay judge system in 2009, which is similar to a jury, it operates in a unique way. For serious crimes, a panel convenes. 3 professional judges, 6 randomly selected citizens. A death sentence does not require a unanimous decision. A simple majority that includes at least one professional judge is sufficient. The process is also heavily reliant on confessions. Critics argue this places immense pressure on suspects during long interrogations without a lawyer present, sometimes leading to false confessions which become the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. In the US, a death sentence triggers an automatic appeals process, multi-layered and can last for decades. It starts with direct appeals and can go all the way to the US Supreme Court. After that, a prisoner can file further appeals in state and federal courts. In Japan, the appeals process is more streamlined and significantly faster. Once the Supreme Court upholds the sentence, the Minister of Justice can sign the execution order at any time. Life for a condemned prisoner in the United States is a life of extreme isolation, but it is also one with a degree of structure and known rules. Most death row inmates are held in supermax-style facilities. They typically spend 23 hours a day in a small, solitary cell. They eat their meals alone. Recreation is usually limited to 1 hour in an enclosed space, often a cage-like dog run, by themselves. However, they generally have access to television, radio, books. They can also correspond with family, lawyers, and journalists. They are usually allowed non-contact visits, speaking through a plexiglass barrier. The conditions on Japan's death row are defined by secrecy and psychological strain. Inmates are held in strict solitary confinement in detention centers, not prisons. Their cells are often monitored 24 hours a day by a camera. Communication with the outside world is severely restricted. Inmates are often limited to corresponding with only a few approved family members and their legal counsel. Visits are infrequent and heavily monitored. Unlike in the US, prisoners are not allowed to watch television or listen to the radio. Their days are monotonous and silent, designed to prevent any disruption and enforce total control, a state of limbo that can last for years. In the American system, while isolated, there is a predictable rhythm. Prisoners know when they will receive mail, when they can make a phone call, or when their hour of recreation is scheduled. Some states even allow death row inmates to work or participate in limited educational activities. They are part of a larger, known prison population even if segregated from it. The rules are written down, and there are grievance procedures. In Japan, the opposite is true. The daily existence is one of complete uncertainty, governed by unwritten rules. Prisoners are forbidden from communicating with each other. They must sit in a specific posture and are not allowed to freely move around. In the United States, the final days leading up to an execution are meticulously planned and highly publicized. Once all appeals are exhausted and a final execution date is set, a death watch period begins. The inmate is typically moved to a special cell near the execution chamber. During this time, they are under 24-hour observation. They are allowed increased visits with family, spiritual advisors, lawyers. A significant and well-known tradition is the last meal. The condemned is allowed to request a special meal, although some states have placed limits on this. The process in Japan could not be more different. It is built on a foundation of secrecy and surprise. A prisoner on death row begins each day not knowing if it will be their last. The execution order is signed by the Minister of Justice in secret. The prisoner is only informed that they will be executed on the morning of the execution itself, usually just 1 or 2 hours beforehand. There is no death watch, no final extended visits with family. They are offered a final meal, but there is little time to contemplate it. Their family is only notified after the execution has already taken place. American executions, while closed to the general public, are witnessed events. Family members of the victim, family members of the condemned, journalists, state-appointed officials. The process, usually lethal injection, is laid out in a detailed protocol. The inmate is strapped to a gurney, IV lines are inserted, and a series of drugs are administered. The condemned is often permitted to make a final statement. This element of transparency makes the execution a public, documented act of the state. In Japan, the execution is a private, unobserved affair. The method is hanging. The prisoner is led to a room with a trapdoor in the floor, a hood is placed over their head, and a rope is placed around their neck. In an adjacent room, several officers simultaneously press buttons, only one of which actually opens the trapdoor. This is done so that no single officer knows if they caused the death. There are no witnesses beyond the officials present. One of the most persistent myths in the United States is that the death penalty is a major deterrent to violent crime. Proponents often argue that the fear of execution will stop potential murderers. However, decades of research and data tell a different story. Criminological studies have overwhelmingly failed to find conclusive evidence that the death penalty deters crime more effectively than a life sentence. In fact, states without the death penalty often have lower murder rates than states that use it. The reality is that most murders are not premeditated acts, where the killer is weighing the potential punishment. In Japan, a common misconception is that the system is infallible, and that only the truly guilty are ever sentenced to death. The heavy reliance on confessions, the lack of a robust American-style appeals process, creates significant risks. There have been several high-profile cases where individuals sentenced to death were later exonerated. The case of Iwao Hakamata is a powerful example. He spent 48 years on death row before being released in 2014 due to new DNA evidence, highlighting the very real possibility of a wrongful conviction within the Japanese system. Another myth in the United States is that executing a prisoner is cheaper than keeping them in prison for life. This seems logical on the surface, but the facts prove it false. The truth is, death penalty cases are extraordinarily expensive. Mandatory appeals, specialized legal teams, prosecution, defense, heightened security on death row far exceed the cost of a life sentence. A study in California found the state had spent over $4 billion on capital punishment since 1978, for only 13 executions. It is a costly legal marathon, not a sprint. In Japan, there is a belief that the public is nearly unanimous in its support for capital punishment. Opinion polls consistently show high levels of support, often around 80%, but some argue these polls are misleading. Critics point out that when polls offer alternatives, such as life in prison without parole, support drops significantly. The Japanese government often cites this strong public support as a primary reason for retaining the death penalty. However, the lack of vigorous public debate and limited information provided to the public may contribute to these high approval ratings. In the United States, public opinion on the death penalty is complex and has been slowly but steadily shifting. For decades, a strong majority of Americans supported capital punishment. In the mid-1990s, support peaked at around 80%. However, that number has been in decline. Today, in 2025, polls show that support has fallen to its lowest point in nearly 50 years, hovering just above 50%. This decline is driven by several factors, including wrongful convictions, moral and ethical objections, the high financial cost of capital cases. The narrative is one of growing doubt. The conversation in America is also increasingly polarized along political and racial lines. Support for the death penalty is significantly higher among Republicans, Democrats, Independents. There are also stark racial disparities in how the punishment is applied. Black defendants are far more likely to receive a death sentence than white defendants, especially if the victim was white. This has led many to view the death penalty not just as a legal issue, but as a civil rights issue. High-profile exonerations, often due to DNA evidence, have shaken public confidence and fueled the abolitionist movement. In Japan, the landscape of public opinion appears much more stable. As mentioned, government-sponsored polls consistently show that a large majority, often around 80% of the Japanese public, supports retaining the death penalty. The government frequently uses this statistic to justify its continued use. Supporters often point to the traditional belief that criminals who have taken a life must forfeit their own as a way to achieve justice and provide closure for victims' families. The media coverage of heinous crimes often reinforces this sentiment, leading to public calls for severe punishment. However, beneath this surface of overwhelming support there is a quiet but growing opposition. Human rights organizations, the Japan Federation of Bar Associations and various international bodies have been vocal in their criticism. They argue that the public is not well informed about the system's flaws. Few cases illustrate the Japanese system better than that of Shoko Asahara, the leader of the Aum Shinrikyo doomsday cult. In 1995, his followers released deadly sarin gas into the Tokyo subway system, killing 13 people and injuring thousands. The attack sent a shockwave through Japanese society. Asahara's trial lasted nearly 8 years before he was sentenced to death in 2004. His case became a symbol of the ultimate crime against society, and for many Japanese people, the death penalty was the only appropriate response. His appeals were eventually exhausted. Asahara remained on death row for 14 years. During this time, he was held in solitary confinement, and reports suggested his health deteriorated. Then, in July 2018, the Minister of Justice authorized his execution, along with 12 other cult members. In the United States, the case of serial killer Ted Bundy provides a stark contrast. Bundy confessed to murdering at least 30 young women across several states in the 1970s. His trial was a media circus, one of the first to be nationally televised, turning the legal proceedings into a public spectacle. After being sentenced to death in Florida, Bundy spent nearly a decade on death row. During this time, he exhausted numerous appeals, gave high-profile interviews, even assisted law enforcement. His case was a constant fixture in public consciousness. Unlike Asahara's silent wait, Bundy's final days were a public countdown. His execution date was widely known. Protests and vigils for and against his execution, the media chronicled his every move, his last meal, and his final words. When he was executed in the electric chair in 1989, crowds outside the prison cheered. The Bundy case exemplifies the American approach, prolonged, public, often sensationalized process where the condemned remains a public figure until the very end. It was a spectacle of justice, a world away from the silent finality of the Japanese system. In the end, comparing the United States and Japanese death penalty systems reveals a fundamental conflict in values. The American system, for all its flaws, prioritizes legal due process and transparency, at least in theory. The long drawn-out appeals process is a testament to a legal culture deeply fearful of making an irreversible mistake. Every step is debated, litigated, and reported on. This public struggle reflects a society deeply divided, uncomfortable with the power of the state to take a life even when it believes it is justified. The cost is expensive, slow, and often seemingly inefficient. The Japanese system, on the other hand, prioritizes order, finality, and social harmony over individual rights during the final stages of punishment. The secrecy surrounding executions and the surprise nature of notification are designed to maintain control. The cost is a system critics argue is cruel, opaque, and lacks sufficient safeguards against wrongful execution. There are no easy answers, only hard questions about the most profound power a state can wield: the power over life and death.